All right, y'all, welcome back to the show. It's Anti-War Radio. I'm Scott Horton. I'm happy to welcome Mohammed Sahimi back to the show. Been a little while. How's it going, Mohammed?
Not too bad. I'm happy to be back in your program, Scott.
Yeah, me too. Very happy to have you here. Everyone, if you're not familiar, I'll direct you to original.antiwar.com/Sahimi. The latest article is called Don't Remove the MEK from the Terrorist List. And Mohammed is a professor of chemical engineering and materials science at the University of Southern California, and he is the lead political columnist for the website PBS Frontline Tehran Bureau, which has really great essays by a whole lot of people as well as Mohammed. So go and check that out, PBS Frontline, the Iran Bureau. Bob Dreyfus, the Leverets, et cetera. Now, Mohammed, what is the Mujahideen al-Khalq?
Well, the talk in the United States is that they are lobbying members of Congress, politicians, and influential people to get the organization off the terrorist list of the State Department. In 1997, when reformist Iranian President Mohammad Khatami was elected, as a gesture to Iran, the Clinton administration put the organization on its terrorist list simply because the organization had committed many terrorist acts within Iran against population, government officials, and so on, and had also allied itself by the regime of Saddam Hussein, which was in power in Iraq at that time. And the organization has remained on the terrorist list ever since. But in the aftermath of Iranian elections of 2009 that was hotly disputed and there were large demonstrations, the organization has been trying to take advantage of the situation and by a very intensive campaign trying to get itself off the terrorist list. And because of that, a lot of Iranian Americans who live in the United States, particularly those such as myself who are anti-war activists, are strongly opposed to delisting of MEK from the terrorist list because we believe that if the MEK is delisted from the terrorist list, it will lead to more terrorist actions by the organization and may eventually even lead to war with Iran, which of course none of the would like to have. So that's the gist of the issue.
All right, now, so tell us more about the history of the MEK. They're even at least accused of killing some Americans back during the Iranian Revolution when they were still in the good graces of the Ayatollah, right?
Actually, yes, the MEK was founded in 1965 as an organization to fight the regime of the Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi, the regime that was in power before the Iranian Revolution. One of the speciality of MEK in the early 1970s was to attack American advisors in Iran, American corporations, and so on. So several American military advisors in Iran in the early 70s were assassinated by the MEK. The MEK also supported the Iranian Revolution of 1979 that was led by Ayatollah Khomeini. And in November of 1979, when the American embassy in Tehran was overrun by Iranian students that called themselves followers of Imam's line, and 53 Americans were taken hostage, the MEK also supported the hostage taking and declared its support for the students and Ayatollah Khomeini. But in 1981, because the MEK could not actually come to power through elections, some part of it was because of the fact that the government restricted its activity, and part of it because of the fact that the MEK, although it had large following, could not really get as many votes that are needed. It decided to take up arms against the Iranian government, and then it started a campaign of assassination. And that helped, of course, in Iran under the revolutionary conditions of that era, that helped to the reactionary forces within the establishment to get stronger, and they retaliated by carrying out a campaign of executions against the followers of MEK. So it was basically tit for tat between Mujahideen and the Iranian government, and in the early 1980s, thousands of Mujahideen followers, as well as thousands of people, were killed because of the arms struggle between Mujahideen and the government. because the Mujahideen could not succeed in their armed struggle, in the campaign of assassination against the Iranian government, what they did was they moved their headquarters to Iraq and made an alliance with Saddam Hussein, which was involved. Iraq was involved in a very ferocious war with Iran at that time. So they moved to Iraq and they started collaborating with the Iraqi army and spying on Iranian forces. So for Iranian people actually began hating them, and the hatred and the fact that they despise them at that time has remained ever since, because these people basically committed treason against their homeland by allying themselves with the regime of Saddam Hussein.
Mm-hmm. Then they're kind of the mirror image of the Supreme Islamic Council, the Iraqis who fled to Iran during the Iran-Iraq War. In a way. Exactly.
If the Iranian Mujahideen had moved to Iraq and working with Saddam Hussein, and the Supreme Iraqi Council was in Iran working with the Iranian government. But what happened was, at the end of Iran-Iraq War, when Resolution 598, United Nations Security Council Resolution 598 went into effect, and both was agreed to a ceasefire, then Mujahideen force attacked Iran from the Iraqi side with the support of Iraqi Air Force, hoping that they would overthrow the government because they thought that people were tired and they wanted to get rid of the regime. But what happened was the Iranian army easily defeated them and killed many of them. Then they stayed in Iraq, and then when the first Persian Gulf War happened in 1990-1991, after the war, if you remember, President George H.W. Bush promised that if the Iraqi Kurds in the north and the Shiites in the south rise against the regime of Saddam Hussein, the United States will help them. When they did that, the United States didn't help them, and Mujahideen used their forces in collaboration with Saddam Hussein army to crush Iraqi dissidents in the north and Shias in the south. And in fact, these facts has been documented. So basically, Mujahideen became a tool for Saddam Hussein to kill more of his citizens in the north and the south. So that added to the disreputation of this organization. And at the same time, there was a political transformation within the organization, whereby the organization, which was basically a political military organization, was transformed into basically a political cult, sort of a Stalinist cult, whereby the ideological leader, Masoud Rajavi, was above questioning, and he was undisputed leader. And then he appointed his own wife, Maryam Rajavi, as the so-called president-elect of the resistance, whereas she has never been elected by any body that I know of. So that has become sort of a political cult ever since, with members of Mujahideen having no ability to leave the organization or to criticize the leadership or to tell their stories of what has happened to them over the past 3 decades that they have been in exile. For example, then what happened was in 2003 when the United States invaded Iraq, the Camp Ashraf, which is basically a mini city near Iranian border in Iraq, where a lot of Mujahideen forces were residing, was surrounded by U.S. forces, and Mujahideen signed a capitulation agreement with U.S. forces, and they were disarmed. Ever since they have stayed there, even though other countries have offered to take them in so that they would be dispersed. And the leadership of Mujahideen wanted to keep them there because they wanted to stay close to Iranian border. Now, why they wanted to do that? Because they want to show that they still have forces near the Iranian border, and they think that was a winning card for them to have forces there so that they can get support from foreign powers so that hopefully they can go back to Iran and take power again. So that's basically what's going on.
As we go out to this break. Everybody, it's Mohammed Sahimi, professor at USC, leader of the Tehran Bureau over there at the PBS Frontline website, and also writes for antiwar.com, original.antiwar.com/Sahimi. We're talking about the Mujahideen al-Khalq, communist, terrorist, lunatic, weirdos. All right, y'all, welcome back to the show. It's Anti-War Radio. I'm Scott Horton, and I'm talking with Mohammed Sahimi, professor at USC, writer for the PBS Frontline Iran Bureau, and also antiwar.com, original.antiwar.com. And we're talking a lot about the Mujahideen al-Khalq and their history. And where we left off was right about 2003 and the American invasion. And Professor Sahimi was explaining how the Americans basically cut a deal that said, well, we'll let you stay at Camp Ashraf and protect you, more or less. But I wanted to actually, Mohammed, go back to the time in between the September 11th attack and the invasion of Iraq, when the Leverets, as they've reported over and over, were working closely with the Iranians on issues surrounding the war against al-Qaeda, and had worked out a deal, or at least been offered a deal by the Iranians, that they would trade Osama bin Laden's son, and not the one that's in Rolling Stone magazine, but one who's still dedicated to his father's cause, and numerous other al-Qaeda guys who had fled Afghanistan during the bombing of Afghanistan in 2001 into Iran, who the Iranian government had basically arrested and put either in prison or on house arrest, and was keeping them there. And they were willing to give all these guys up to the Americans if we would just trade for them some members of the Mujahideen al-Khalq. But the way I understand it, the Defense Department, Donald Rumsfeld and the neocons and I guess Dick Cheney's office and whatever decided that they would rather have these communists, holy warrior, terrorist, civilian killer guys stay in Iraq and work for them as terrorists in Iran than trade them for actual al-Qaeda guys, the so-called enemy from, the war we were fighting.
That is completely true. The deal was offered by Iran. And in fact, the Iranian government did not want, what they offered was, as you said, they offered a son of Osama bin Laden in return for the top leadership of Mujahideen, including the two Rajavis, the husband and wife Rajavi, and a few others that have been leading the organization for the past 3 decades. But at that time, in the Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld Pentagon, there was considerable support for the Mujahideen, because they thought that they could use Mujahideen and the network of spies that he supposedly had in Iran to spy on Iran and use it as a sort of leverage with Iranian government, because the Mujahideen have proven to be able to carry out terrorist operation within Iran. So they wanted to keep them around so that in due time when they needed, they could use Mujahideen help. But after 2000, and in fact, let me point out that the Camp Ashraf, the Mujahideen headquarters in Iraq, was protected by the U.S. forces all the way from 2003 when U.S. Invaded Iraq to 2009. It was only in 2009 that the security of the Camp Ashraf was transferred from the U.S. forces to the Iraqi government. At the same time, let me also point out that Mujahideen in Iraq have also been interfering in Iraq internal affairs. They have sided with Ayad Allawi, who is the main foe to Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki. And if anybody knows Persian and watches Mujahideen television, which is called Simaya Azadi, which means the face of freedom, you will see that the programs are just full of propaganda in favor of Ayad Allawi in Iraq. So basically, this is a group that has been carrying out terrorist operation, that has transformed itself into a political cult that does not accept Iraqi sovereignty, and at the same time does not accept the refugee status within Iraq, refuses to leave Iraq, but also interferes in Iraqi internal affairs, and at the same time, its lobbying campaign in the United States has attracted even mainstream politicians, such as Howard Dean, the former presidential candidate, and even people in Congress like Brad Sherman and others, and people like General James Jones, who was President Obama's first national security advisor. Even Mary Robinson, who was formerly the president of Ireland, has spoken in favor of this terrorist organization. And Patrick Kennedy, one of the Kennedys, has also spoken in favor of MEK. But the point about all of this is that none of these people actually know about the history of Mujahideen and what they have done. And the fact that this group is at the grandest scale is despised by Iranian people, because these group have committed one treason after another against the Iranian nation. They allied themselves with Saddam Hussein. They carried out assassination operation. They invaded Iran. And in August of 2002, they were the ones who received the information from Israeli intelligence Mossad and announced to the world that Iran is constructing a uranium enrichment facility in Natanz, which was not illegal, by the way, as I have explained many times in my articles on antiwar.com. But they reported it, and that basically started the whole business of confronting Iran's nuclear threat, or so-called Iran's nuclear threat. So they have been committing treason one after another over the past 3 decades, and yet because of their slick and intensive lobbying campaign, they are getting close to be delisted from the terrorist list of the State Department. Now, what they have done is they have set up a lot of front organizations. For example, MEK has a political arm called National Resistance Council of Iran, which is not listed by the State Department as a terrorist organization, which means that it is free to operate within the United States. It has also set up so-called consulting companies on Middle East, whose main task and only task is to provide false information about what's going on to members of Congress in their attempt to get the organization be delisted from the terrorist list. It also has organizations with very nice-sounding names, like Council for Democratic Change in Iran, which is another front organization for MEK that invites politicians to speak at Mujahideen's gatherings without telling them that this is basically a front organization for a terrorist organization listed by the State Department. They also provide large honoraria, tens of thousands of dollars, for a short speech to the council. And in this way, they have been able to attract a lot of these mainstream politicians. So a lot of Iranians in the Iranian-American community are really concerned that this terrorist organization with this terrible history will be delisted by the State Department, removed from the terrorist list, and let me assure you that if that happens, it may lead to a war that nobody wants with Iran. This is not in support of what's going on in Iran. As everybody knows, people like me, they can look at my track record on antiwar.com and also on Tehran Bureau. I have a long track record of opposing the Iranian government in Tehran. But this is not that. This is activity as an anti-war activist who is opposed to an illegal and unwanted war with Iran, and let the Iranian people in Tehran and another part of Iran decide their own fate without any outside interference.
Well, I wanted to wrap up real quick one point. We'll get right back to that, but I wanted to get back to that offer to trade between the Iranians and the Americans back in 2003, how they would give up the captured al-Qaeda guys they had in exchange for these Mujahideen al-Khalq terrorists. And that is, the new development that apparently al-Qaeda grabbed an Iranian diplomat in Pakistan, and then they made a deal to give him back to the Iranians that you have to let our guys off a house arrest. And now they're saying that this guy, I think even credible people, not just TV, are claiming that, this guy, Saif al-Adil, has already been able to travel outside of Pakistan, outside of Iran into Pakistan, that I guess bin Laden's son is included among one of these guys that they've let off a house arrest. There's a really long article about it in the Associated Press from yesterday, from Sunday. Top al-Qaeda ranks keep footholds in Iran, they call it, and I think they make probably too much of the idea that the Iranians and al-Qaeda guys are friends, but the answer here is that those terrorists that Don Rumsfeld didn't get from the Iranians back in 2003 are now on the loose.
I must say that regardless of what's happening within Iran and regardless of the domestic policy of Iranian government, when it comes to foreign policy, the Iranian government has been actually very pragmatic. They have wanted to seek some sort of accommodation. They have helped the United States in its invasion of Afghanistan. Whether we support it or not is a separate question. But the Iranian government did provide support to U.S. forces in Afghanistan. And regarding the exchange of al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden's sons and MEK leadership, Iranians were still very pragmatic, but it was the United States that rejected the deal.
All right, and now, Mohammed, I wanted to ask you more about what you say about if they're taken off the terrorist list, that could lead to war. Connect some step-by-step for me there and explain what you mean exactly, if you could.
The way a lot of people envision it is the following. If they are delisted from the State Department terrorist list, then they will start raising funds, and then they may start something like what happened in Libya. Namely, they start something somewhere in some part of Iran, and obviously the Iranian forces, the Iranian security forces will attack them, and then they will ask for help from outside, and then the NATO and the U.S. forces and others will go in to bomb and to support an organization which is no longer considered a terrorist organization. This is one of the ways they may approach it, and in fact there has been a lot of speculation about how the MEK is organizing around this concept. The intervention of NATO and the U.S. in Libya has indicated to some of these opposition forces, particularly MEK, that there may be a way to start a war between Iran and the United States and the West so that they could come to power. So this is the fear that people like me have, and it's very likely. It's not, it's not a stretch to think that happens. We know that the Western intelligence agencies have been supporting terrorist operations within Iran. Jundallah, which is a terrorist organization based in Pakistan, attacks Iranian forces within Iran, has been supported by CIA and other organizations. There are Iranian Arabs in oil province of Khuzestan that have been known to be supported by the British government and have carried out terrorist operations within Iran. There are Kurdish groups in northwestern Iran that have received support from Israeli intelligence and some speculate even American intelligence to carry out operation within Iran. So it's not totally out of whack, or it's not totally a stretch to think that Mujahideen, given the network that they have within Iran, may start something along those lines or along the way that was happening in Libya. And that's basically the fear that some people, including myself, have.
Mm-hmm. Well, and as far as their so-called intelligence, you mentioned how they broke the story about Natanz, back in 2003 and what have you. And all of that, really, all their accusations, many of which have not panned out at all. Secret nuclear factories in tunnels outside Tehran and all this nonsense. They come up with this stuff all the time. But they're basically just laundering Israeli intel and Israeli propaganda most of the time. I wonder how closely connected, how loyal to Israel the Mujahideen al-Khalq is at this point, do you think?
We don't know. How close is the connection. But, for example, when the U.S. invaded Iraq in 2003, Masoud Rajavi, the ideological leader, disappeared from the scene. Nobody knows where he is. And there is a lot of speculation, at least in the Iranian community, that he may be in Israel, living in Israel. We know that there is a close connection, close working relation between Mujahideen and Mossad. As I pointed out, and you also repeated again, it was Mossad that provided the intelligence to Mujahideen in 2002 about the Natanz facility. And aside from the Natanz facility itself, which wasn't illegal, most or all of outlandish claims that Mujahideen have made about Iranian nuclear program haven't panned out. So basically, they are an they act as sort of an arm of Mossad to propagate the propaganda for Mossad. I must also mention that in 2002, when that intelligence was provided to MEK, Mossad approached Iranian monarchists to give them the information so that they would publicize it. But the Iranian monarchists, out of their nationalism, they refused to accept the intelligence and publicize it. So the next thing they did, that they approached MEK, given its long history of collaboration with Saddam Hussein and other powers, just to overthrow the Iranian government and come to power. They accepted to play this role, and they have been playing ever since. So there is at least a close working relationship between MEK and Israeli intelligence. I have no doubt about it, and I think you wouldn't find too many among Iranians who would not believe the close connections between MEK and Mossad and intelligence, Israeli intelligence.
Mm-hmm. And now, you mentioned this in your article too, and I'll let this be the last point, but I'll ask you to elaborate as much as you can, if you got the time, about the relationship between the Mujahideen al-Khalq's political front group, the NCRI, and other political fronts for them here in the United States, and the neoconservative Fifth Column in DC.
Oh yeah, I mean there is Iran Policy Committee that was founded by Raymond Tantar, who's a conservative academic, used to be a professor at the University of Michigan, that has been supporting U.S. Everywhere. John Bolton has spoken to Mujahideen gatherings many times and has said repeatedly that the United States should do two things: bomb Iran and support the MEK. James Woosley, the former CIA director under Clinton administration, has been supporting the MEK. Claire Lopez, another CIA former operator, has been supporting MEK. So there are all sorts of conservative and neocon support for MEK, and based on what I know, the AIPAC, the Israeli-American Public Affairs Committee, has also been supporting the Mujahideen campaign lobby in the United States behind the scene. So there is considerable neoconservative and Israeli support for what MEK has been doing in the United States. And in some sense it's easy, because after the 2009 elections and what happened to the peaceful demonstrators in Tehran and other places in Iran, what Mujahideen do is they approach these politicians, even the mainstream politicians, and represents themselves not as MEK members, but as supporters of Iran's democratic, peaceful green movement, and say that what we want to do is to support the green movement in Iran. And given that the reputation of green movement around the world as a peaceful, democratic movement is not difficult to convince these people that they may actually represent the green movement outside Iran. There are other people. For example, there is this guy, Ali Safavi, who has been an active member and supporter of Mujahideen for the past 4 decades. He has this consulting company, supposedly consulting company, but the only thing that he does is he spreads propaganda for MEK and National Council of Resistance. He claims that he is a member of Iranian parliament in exile. There is no such parliament in exile for Iranian people, as far as I know. The only thing that exists is basically a politburo of Mujahideen that they call the Iranian parliament in exile. So there are all sorts of propaganda of this sort. Then there is this guy, Alireza Jafarzadeh, who was a spokesman for MEK, but now he acts as supposedly as an independent consultant, and Fox News hired him as some sort of Middle East expert to analyze what is happening in Iran. So he also presents himself not as a former spokesman for MEK and as supporter of MEK, but as a Fox News analysis. So there are all sorts of tricks that are going on for these people to present themselves anything other than what they really are, namely members and supporters of a terrorist organization that has committed numerous crimes, not just only against Iranian people, but also against Iraqi people, and they have committed treasons and so on and so forth. Everywhere that they go, they claim that they have vast support within Iran, whereas they left Iran 30 years ago, and given that 70% of Iranian population is under the age of 35, there is no basically memory of this organization in Iran with the young people, with the large majority of Iranian people. The older people, the only thing they remember is the repeated treasons that this organization committed against their own native land by aligning themselves with Saddam Hussein regime and attacking Iran and spying on Iranian forces during a long, ferocious war between 1980 and 1988.
Well, and weren't they involved in bombings in 2005 inside Iran?
Oh, they have. And in fact, they claim that they stopped all the terrorist activities in 2001, but documents released by FBI shows that is not true. They have been active at least up until 2004 or 2005. So at least up until then, we know that this organization was still thinking and trying to carry out terrorist organization. They
well, I
also
thought that there were bombings in 2005, buses and other things that were attributed to MEK. No?
Well, there have been bombings in Iran that the Iranian government has attributed to MEK. Now, whether they were actually carried out with MEK is subject to debate. But there are other operations and bombings that can be definitely linked to MEK.
Yeah, it could have been the CIA's other pets, Jandala, and MEK did something.
Exactly. I mean, exactly. Yeah. And in fact, several years ago, there was a speculation that Mujahideen members had moved into Pakistan and Afghanistan to work with these terrorist groups in order to attack Iran. So these are, of course, a speculation, but the very fact that these speculations exist and the very fact that these terrorist operations have happened in Iran repeatedly just goes to show that the danger that this group poses, if it is delisted from the terrorist list of the State Department.
Mm-hmm. Well, and reading your article, Don't Remove the MEK from the Terrorist List by Mohammed Sahimi at antiwar.com, which has all links in the antiwar.com tradition to the proof of all your most controversial assertions there, really has a very scary group of people supporting these guys, the Boltons and the James Woolseys of the world.
Yes.
Ties with Chalabi and the Iraqi National Congress, no doubt with the Rendon Group and whatever. I mean, the people in America, the politicians and the neocons and the lobbyists who are pushing for the normalization of all things MEK here are, the very worst of our American war party. That ought to say a lot right there.
Yes, I totally agree. And that's why anti-war activists such as myself have been working on this. In addition to antiwar.com article that you mentioned, I also posted 2 long articles on truthout.com just a couple of weeks ago. The links to those articles are also in my antiwar.com article, and people can go on. Pardon me?
Oh, I was just saying, great, I didn't know.
Yes, the links are there, and if you just go there, the articles are long and give the whole history of Mujahideen from the time they were founded in 1965 all the way to 1980s when they were committing treason against Iranians and collaborating with Saddam Hussein and everything else. I mean, if you just go and look at those articles, you will see it for yourself. And then the connections that they have made with neocons, they have proven to be very flexible when it comes to working with anybody who helps them to come to power in Iran. I mean, these guys were supposedly anti-imperialist forces, leftist forces in the 1970s and 1980s. Even in mid-1980s, they were still propagating anti-imperialist slogans, but once it became clear that they could not reach power through armed struggle and through alliances with Saddam Hussein and forces like that, and they had to get support from the West, they suddenly forgot about all of their past. They claimed that all those assassinations that had been carried out by MEK in the early 1970s were not their work because there was a communist split in the organization in 1975, and therefore the leadership of MEK tries to attribute those assassinations to those communists that split from the organization. But as I explained in the article that was posted on Truth Out, the claim is totally wrong because at least some of those assassinations happened when there was no split in the organization between 1972 and 1975, and therefore it can be irrefutably linked to the present leadership that gets all of its credentials and legitimacy from the original founders of the organization in 1960s and early 1970s that carried out those assassinations. So we cannot just forget about the past and the record that this organization has, and that's why this organization, despite having almost no support within Iran, is so dangerous because they have proven very adept at approaching people and trying to raise funds for their activity. One of the questions that people should ask is, for example, how is an organization like MEK is able to get so much funding for all of its operation? If you look at their operation, they are spending millions of dollars every year on their lobbying campaign and approaching people. They have a television program, they have publication, and so on. So the question is, where do they get all of these funds? The organization claims that their supporters in the United States pays for them. But that's nonsense because, for example, I know some MEK supporters in Los Angeles, here in Los Angeles, and they are in no financial position to provide even the slightest, the most minor type of help to the organization. So the answer is, as most people believe, they get their support, their financial support, from Israel, Saudi Arabia, and possibly from Jordan. And there is a speculation that if Rajavi is not in Israel, he may be living either in Jordan or Saudi Arabia. So they get their support from those countries. And we know, for example, what type of a terrible system Saudi Arabia has in that region, a reactionary dictatorship that opposes to any sort of democracy in that region. So, and Saudi Arabia, of course, has been a big foe of Iran, not just during the Islamic Revolution since 1979, but even before 1979. So there is this long rivalry, history of rivalry between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And once again, this organization, MEK, apparently has some links with another foe or another rival of Iran in that region. So as you can see, this organization is willing to make alliance even with Satan if it is necessary, just to come to power to Iran. But as I said at the end of my antiwar.com article, if this organization ever comes to power in Iran, the bloodshed that we will see in Iran, the bloodshed that has happened in Iran since 1979 revolution, will be child's play compared to the bloodshed that will happen if this organization comes to power. So it is dangerous in all levels and must be prevented from doing anything meaningful at all levels by anybody who is anti-war.
Right on. Well, we'll have to leave it at that, but I want to recommend everyone. I found the articles here at Truth Out, U.S. Neocons' New Overtures to Terrorist Opposition Group in Iran, Part 1 and Part 2, and then at antiwar.com, original.antiwar.com/Sahimi, don't remove the MEK from the terrorist list. Been great. Thank you very much, Mohammed, for your time on the show today.
Thank you, Scott, for having me in your program.
Mohammed Sahimi, everybody.